what I learned was the law of cause and effect. Now, the law of cause and effect is called the granddaddy law. It's the iron law of the universe. It says that for every effect in your life, there's a cause. That everything happens for a reason. It says that success is not an accident. Failure is not an accident. Everything happens for a reason. And if you can be clear about the effect that you want, which is why Jim and Dennis talk so much about goals, and I will later, is if you can be clear about the effect that you want, you can trace it back to someone who at one time did not have that effect, and then find out what they did and do the same thing over and over again until you get the same result. And as my friend Nito says, success leaves tracks. If you want to follow a person in the snow, you put your feet in their tracks. If you want to find a successful person, if you want to become wealthy, success leaves tracks. Follow the tracks. You got most people who want to become wealthy are trying to make their own trail. You know, don't go where every other person has gone. Go to where no one has gone and blaze a new trail. Yeah. You know what they call a pioneer? A pioneer is someone lying face down in the dirt with their back full of arrows. You know, that's not your goal. If you want to be successful, what you do is you find out hundreds of thousands of millions of people who started from nothing and become wealthy, and you do the same thing. Only after you reach the end of their trail do you begin to make your own trail. But you don't start making your own trail at the beginning. So you do what they do over and over again, and here's what I've learned. Nobody's smarter than you, and nobody's better than you. Nobody's smarter than you, nobody's better. People who are on the fast track are not better than you, they're not smarter than you, some are dumber than you, some have fewer talents, fewer abilities, less intelligence, less opportunities, but they're doing the cause and effect relationships. They're learning from other people. I've spoken to many people who have come over to this country from other countries. I'll give you a great story. I can tell you so many stories. I was doing a talk in Los Angeles. We were doing an infomercial that was being videotaped. They had a studio audience. And during the break, one of the gentlemen in the studio audience stood up and said, I'd like to explain why I'm here to be in this audience while Brian Tracy is making this film. And he was from Pakistan. And he was beautifully dressed. And he stood up. He said, I am from Pakistan. He spoke very well. He said, I came over to the United States 3 years ago. He said, my uncle and my brother had signed my papers, so he was legal. So he said, I came over here to work with them in their company, and by the time I got everything cleared and I'd gone to university and cleared up and come here, their company had gone broke, and they both moved away in different directions. When I arrived in Los Angeles, they were gone. I knew nobody, and I was penniless. He said, I didn't know what to do. He said, I had no idea how to succeed in America. He said, and I was walking along, and one day I walked past the University of Southern California, UCLA, and I had gone to university in Karachi, and I knew a little bit about university, so I sort of drifted onto the campus. I didn't even have a place to stay. He was essentially homeless. He was carrying all of his stuff in a bag. He said, and he went to the dining room where they line up at the cafeteria and they leave their food, and he would sit down next to somebody, and when they're finished, he'd slip over and he'd eat what they hadn't eaten, and this was a good way to get food, and he started to sleep in the bushes on the UCLA campus. In the daytime, he would bundle up his stuff. He'd wash in the bathrooms. He'd hang around the university. He looked like a homeless person, dirty, unkempt, ragged, lousy clothes, typical student. He said he didn't even stand out. After he'd been doing this for 2 or 3 weeks, he'd been hanging around the campus, and he was just in despair. He finally went to the counselor, and he said, I need some advice. The counselor said, what's your student number? He said, well, we don't have a student number. The counselor said, well, I can't give you. He told all this story. I'm just fascinated. He said, I can't give you advice or counseling because I have to log in the people that I work with. He said, well, what is the problem? He said, well, I came from Pakistan. He told him his story. He said, I don't know what to do. He said, well, the only thing I can do for you is I will give you this set of Brian Tracy audio programs to listen to. It's a true story. He said, but you can't take them away. I'll give you a tape player. You can sit in this room over here, and you can listen to them and take notes. So he didn't have a lot going, if you know. So he said, okay, I'll do that. To him, it was completely bizarre, listening to a bunch of audio cassettes in a cubicle. So he took them over and he sat them down. He got notes from the wastebaskets, and he began making notes. He came back every day for a week. He listened to the programs hour after hour and wrote notes on how to succeed in America. He said, went back at the end of the week, he gave it back to me, he said, thank you. He said, now I understand how you succeed in this country. He walked out. He said, that was 2.5 years ago. He walked in. He said, I drove my new Mercedes to this filming. He said, I own 2 companies. I'm worth $2.5 million. He was wearing a Giorgio Armani suit. He had a Rolex watch. It was beautifully turned out. He said, I have a beautiful home. He said, I have 2 businesses. I'm just starting a third. He said, now I know how it works. And now I can do it over and over again. Now, that is a great story from a person who coming from absolutely nothing, and it's a true story, by the way. It's one of those stories that it wasn't true. It should be. Okay. it's word for word true. Anyway, so the law of cause and effect says that if you do what other successful people do, you get the same results they will. But if you don't do what other successful people do, nothing can help you. So your job and my job, and this changed my whole life. Chris mentioned I started, built, managed, or turned around 22 businesses. I've also consulted with more than 1,000 businesses of every size, Fortune 500 companies in 23 countries. In every single case, I go in order to work with them, I have to study and figure out how this business works. What are the cause and effect relationships? How is money, income, profit generated in this business? What are the constraints that are holding profit back? And so on. And so I've been able to develop a pretty good intellectual foundation in these companies. But what I found is if you do what other successful people do in an industry, you get the same results. Do you know that in business today, the 80-20 rule applies? Is that 20% of businesses make all the money, and the other 80% are marginal? And they all start off at the same starting line, but 20% make all the money. In our society, 20% of the people make all the money, and the other 80% worry about money all their life. So which would you like to be in, the top 20 or the bottom 80? Top 20. Now make the decision to be in the top 20. Then the only question you ask is, how do you get there? Well, here was the turning point for me as I began to study philosophy and metaphysics.